Prior to emancipation, no rights existed for the enslaved Texans. They were simply property. Until June 19, 1865, when General Gordon Granger announced freedom from the balcony in Galveston, granting liberty to the enslaved and fostering resentment from the society that used to be their masters. The new state constitution of 1869 recognized the rights of African American men to vote, serve in office and on juries, and attend school. At the same time, pressure to keep the races separate emerged, giving birth to Jim Crow laws. African Americans faced hate and violence through lynching and KKK intimidation, but discrimination also took legal forms with poll taxes and forced segregation. Access to education, especially through Texas's black colleges, created a learned African American middle class, torchbearers for civil rights. The struggle to realize equality made many heroes in Texas, some of whose names are known, and countless others who fought in anonymity. By the mid-20th century, organizers emerged such as Juanita Craft, who spread the message of the NAACP throughout Texas, and Wiley College's James L. Farmer Jr., who helped organize the Congress of Racial Equality. Protests, boycotts, and sit-ins moved freedom forward. Texans Dr. Lonnie E. Smith, Dr. Lawrence Aaron Nixon, and even M. Sweat took their cases all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, obtaining rulings in favor of opening primaries to black voters and desegregating universities, colleges, and public schools. With the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson, a proud son of Texas, made Jim Crow segregation and discrimination illegal, as well as paved the way to sweeping reform. And the entrance of an influential African-American Texan woman into Congress, Barbara Jordan.
She was fiery.
Oh yeah, Barbara Jordan. Oh, this is Lady Bird Johnson.
She had a very articulate way of speaking.
Yes.
That amazed me. She was a very educated woman.
Yes. It's Lady Bird Johnson.
Even after the Confederacy surrendered and the Civil War concluded, emancipation was kept secret in Texas. Texan slaveholders had a strong financial motivation to keep the enslaved at work as long as possible. When it broke on June 19, 1865, the news was met with astonishment by the enslaved. Some former slaves shifted to sharecropping and continued to be chained by debt to their former masters. Others moved from the fields to the cities and encountered Jim Crow and black codes, which victimized them even further. But some freed people set off for themselves, got their own land, and established more than 500 freedmen's communities in the decades following the Civil War. There they could live as they wished. They built churches and schools and shared what they had with one another as they pursued self-sufficiency. One historian reports that in 1870, around 800 blacks owned farms in Texas. By 1890, that number had soared to more than 12,000. In rural settlements like Bethlehem, Mount Olive, and Shapleville, generations built a living off the land. Other freedmen's communities like Dallas's Deep Ellum and Austin's Clarksville planted their roots on the edges of towns, and the cities grew up around them. They quickly became spiritual, cultural, and business centers for the black community for generations to come. Shortly after emancipation, Reverend Jack Yates established Houston's Freedmen Town in what is now the 4th Ward. Freed from slavery, he ascended to the pulpit of Antioch Baptist Church, where he inspired many others to build their own community, establish their own schools, buy their own land, learn their own trades, and never look back. case of African American history, many of these documents were never created, much less preserved. However, a powerful living record does exist that reveals Texas's African American heritage, music. Texas blues harkens back to African tribal songs of community. It incorporates the sounds of the enslaved working in the fields, captures the hopes and pain of the prison gang, soars to the rafters of the church, and twangs to the chord of the migrant wandering the dirt roads, riding the rails, seeking work in the lumberyard, seeking love, and seeking safety. Like the migrant, blues is a music of movement and change. And the scale of Texas gave it ample room to grow and diversify. As mixed as its roots were, it mutated and attached itself to other styles and cultures. Creole, Anglo, Euro, and Hispanic, making zydeco, juke, jazz, boogie, shimmy, strut, jump, ragtime, barrel house, R&B, rock and roll, and chivalry. During segregation, a spontaneous venue, maybe a front porch or an ice house, would give birth to a juke joint that would attract wandering blues players and torch singers, becoming an economic, cultural, and commercial center for the community.
Actually, the juke joint was established during the time of slavery. Right, slaves needed a release, but they could just come together. And, without being involved in it. So they would choose one house, and they would meet at that house, maybe once a week, at nighttime, where they could all get together. It's usually a house far enough from the main house so they couldn't be heard. And that's where they were congregated. So actually, I guess you could call it juke joint the first coffee shop, because it was a social place where they could come together, sing, talk, and enjoy each other before they had to go back and do strenuous work. Yes, sir. And now, the modern juke joint probably did get it from the juke boxes, but the original juke joint was originally.
Well, that was my follow-up question, because juke boxes were very expensive to buy, and I knew they didn't have the money to buy.
But every club had a jukebox. So every club, all 7 of the blues. Every one of them.
I think the one where they had to dress up to the night, the day that they had to have it.
But back then, you didn't buy the juke joint. You leased the juke joint. There was a man right here by the name of Mr. Richard Folgers. And Mr. Richard Folgers, he had all the clothing, he had all the food, room equipment, he had all the jukeboxes. Just like anything that you wanted to feel a juke joint. He was the man that had all the records, so whenever the juke joint records were changed, he did it. And so what you did was you leased it. You didn't buy it, you leased it. That's how they were able
I understand.
When they walk up that street and they heard us playing, well, they stopped in there, But it wasn't until after years that went by that I met the Peterson brothers. And their mother
the Peterson brothers
wanted somebody to teach them to play.
This was given about 5
That's
years
what
ago.
they wanted to play.
One of the first records that we ever heard was a BB King record, so I mean, just him being known in this region has a lot to do with the Chitlin circuit. So I mean, it's just a big part of the history.
They've actually
We've been playing blues for about 6 years now.
This Texas Historical Commission has some really good videos.
Chitlin circuit really does play a big part of the history. Just getting all the African American artists like BB King, Bobby Bland, and a lot of those other African American artists out there, especially in the South.
Have you been in Austin? My boy was in Austin.
Oh, no, I'm new to the area.
Yeah, we did a chance.
I got hired by the library in November of a year and 3 months. But we were only open for 2 weeks before we went to Kerr decided to get to COVID. And so there was so much I needed to see or do.
If you ever get a chance, that's a good museum to
Yeah.
take in.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure Rachel or I will contact you at some point in the year. And a lot of these photos and things, that a lot of it came from books we had in the library.
Yes.
So we have some books in the History Center, but most of the books from this exhibit that I pulled information for, they're able to be checked out. They were actually in the library, and they're under